Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Today I have Shweta Malhotra with us on Audio Gyan. Shweta is a graphic designer based in Bombay. After graduating in Applied Arts from Sophia Polytechnic in 2004, she started out as an art director with advertising agencies like McCann Erickson, Contract Advertising and Ogilvy. In Feb 2008, after a short stint at Fabrica, she decided to pursue a career in graphic design and has since worked with firms like Grandmother India, Rediffusion, YNR Design. On a project basis, she has also worked with Chaudhuri Design and Illum Design. She was recently inducted as a member of prestigious Alliance Graphic International, which is an international association of graphic designers drawn from across the globe, founded in 1950. So, thank you, Shweta, for giving your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on Audio again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, I've slightly kept the title of the talk slightly fancy, called as Maximalist, Contrarian, and it's mainly because I've been reading about you, your articles online, and you seem to follow slightly a minimalistic approach in your work. So I've come up with few questions around that, and hoping to get some insights.
Okay.
Cool. So we'll start with this one line which I found in most of the articles about you, which says, my overall design aesthetic is minimal, bold, and graphic, a response to the maximalist visual language prevalent in India. So if you can start by telling us in detail, what do you mean by that? What has been your observations when you say maximalistic visual language? So if that would set the context to the entire conversation as well.
So basically, I think India is all about being loud and adding details and ornate design, color, explosion of color, and everything is I don't see any minimalism in any sort of design. So that's what I mean when I say a response to the maximalist design language prevalent in India.
But in case of Varli paintings, or there are certain pockets in India, right?
Yeah,
where
there are certain artists, but when you look at India overall,
by and large,
there are certain minimalist artists from back in the day whose work is great. But essentially as a country, not just art and design, even on the streets or in Indian wedding fashion, or everything is just over the top. So that's essentially what I mean by maximalism.
No, but what was the initial inspiration? I mean, even I live with solid color clothes and simple plain things, right?
So I think as a person I was anyways sort of a minimalist, and that kind of just came out of my individuality into my design when I started experimenting with illustration and graphic art. So before, when I was in advertising, actually I didn't really I would just be working on the brief, the client and what they want. So when I started on my own and I did this project a couple of years ago, and that's when I started experimenting, and this just came naturally, I guess, also from my personality. And now it's kind of, you won't see it just in my work, but in my style or in my house, things I buy, jewelry, everything. Everything is minimalist, shapes, geometry, solid colors.
And which project
muted
was
colors. This was called Something Cool Every Day, where I did one piece of artwork every day for a year. So that's basically my time of experimentation and doing what I wanted to do. So that's how I started illustrating actually, and started doing graphic art. Also did a show with the 365 pieces in Delhi at the end of the project.
Okay. And if you can illustrate verbally, obviously, why do you define your work to be minimal? I mean, your initial work, which I have seen at least, has been slightly fashion focused, right? But in fashion, again, as you mentioned, weddings and other places, and plus fashion yes, there is a school of thought in fashion as well going down the minimal route, but for a layman at least, it is always adding layers onto it and showcasing the fabric and other things, right? So it's slightly ironic, or like, if you can explain that bit.
Yeah, so I started doing fashion illustrations, and even there, basically for me, that's a visual element. So I try to, whether it's layered or like, I love this brand called Comme des Garçons, or even like Indian illustrations like Sabyasachi or like Payal Khandwala. And so even I would take a Sabyasachi, or like I did this Rohit Bal sort of wedding outfit, I remember back in the day, and I made it so minimal, like people were like, oh my god, this looks so amazing, why can't I actually make the outfit like that? So it's essentially, I treat that as a visual element, and then my style is essentially stripping the details off as much so that the element still sort of maintains the essence and you still know what it is, but just stripping details essentially. So whether it's layered or colorful, or even if it's like, or like very detailed, the sort of task is to how can you make it minimal. So like, and also my sort of aim is to kind of do India modern or India minimal. So even in terms of my branding work and everything, like a lot of people now come to me because I have this sort of contemporary Indian, like has an Indian aesthetic but is also modern and contemporary. So it's become my kind of style in terms of even commercial work, illustration. So that's what I try to do through my work.
No, but and how did, like, I'm assuming this fashion work was early days, right? So you were improving and perfecting your craft in general. So how did you manage to look at the deeper level of, I don't know whether to call it subtext, but something at that level? Like you try and understand the deeper levels and then decide at that level. Because initially when people start, they just copy first. And even in art schools, you have to exactly copy, say, Raja Ravi Verma. And then once you master that craft, then you start your own interpretation. So what was the thought when you started observing the nuances and decided to, yes, I can deal with this as well?
I mean, it started off as, like I said, it came to me naturally. Also, I had been a designer for 8 years by then. So I had enough sort of like skill to kind of judge that. And so when I started experimenting, I think it just came. And so I think it's kind of the art of, like I said, seeing what you're illustrating and bringing it down to its most basic form. Like I would try to make it a shape at the end of it. Like if it's a circle, square, triangle, that's like the most minimal form. But you just kind of keep stripping it down, and people think it's easy, but it's actually, I feel like it's equal work. Like you kind of start with the details, but then you keep taking it off till that doesn't lose its meaning or its what it's supposed to look like. So I started that with fashion, and the fact that I was able to do it with Indian outfits and wedding outfits, and like I did some illustrations for the Bazaar wedding magazine. So even that was sort of, again, wedding-y, over the top, but it still was minimal. So yeah, and
how did you get that conviction that was it because people were appreciating it, or you had some sort of an inherent thought कि नहीं ये ऐसे ही होना चाहिए? What was the...
I mean, initially I started experimenting, then slowly it became like people started commissioning me and people liked it. And because it was kind of refreshing in, like I said, in the Indian context, because everything is so loud and over the top. So this suddenly was refreshing in that sense. And yeah, so once I started doing commissioned work, then I'm still obviously sort of evolving the style and getting better every day. But yeah, started off with just pure experimentation and then grew from that.
And did you happen to travel to understand this, or what was the learning curve like?
You mean before or
generally to get into the style? Yeah. I mean, were there early influencers? Were there any people whom you were referring to?
I mean, my
because it's tough to find a minimal thought process in India, right?
So like one of my mentors is this Japanese designer called Iko Tanaka. So if you see his work, it's exactly that. Like he's done geishas or like Japanese women with just like circles and squares. So like he's like, I have a book of his sort of there in my room like every day to inspire me. So like I love his work. So I've been following his work for a while. Otherwise I'm like a lot of like Ellsworth Kelly, artists also, minimalist artists. Ellsworth Kelly is one of them. Carmen Herrera. Again, just like it's all very sort of profound concepts, but when you look at it, it's like a line or a triangle or, but there is depth to it essentially. So
Interesting. And what has been your observation with respect to like contemporary art scene in India? I mean, since you're in that circuit, if you can share some insights, what's happening and
I mean, I personally like I travel for inspiration. So I'm always like, I feel like the contemporary art scene definitely is way bigger and way more understood outside. So
actually I'll put it this way. So is contemporary as a word getting synonymous with minimalism in the Indian context? Because we have been inspired by IKEA now, we have been inspired by Apple especially.
Muji.
So Muji. So
I don't think so. Contemporary is just basically modern. It could be in any sort of format. It could be installation. It could be digital. So it's just like basically modern art. I don't think it's necessarily minimal.
And if you can highlight any nuances of like the challenges to make something minimal, which is Indian. If you can take any case study or any particular instance of your work.
Make something
minimal. So you take something like in the fashion sense, you took like a more elaborate scene and then you convert it into. Similarly, any other example, and then what are the challenges while making it minimal?
So I can give an example. I did the branding for this brand called Lemon. So, which was essentially just very playful graphic language with like shapes and semicircles and things and dots. So like this is like one of the projects I love which I did for them was like festive greetings for India. So if you see them, it's essentially I used the graphic language which was like say 5 or 6 shapes, and I managed to create different sort of Indian elements like laddus, and for Baisakhi like wheat, and for Holi it was balloons. So I think it was challenging, but and it also by the end of it looked Indian but so contemporary. Like I also like won awards. I got like a curious elephant for that, and so yeah, I mean that was like, and doing it on a brand. And the client loving it and people appreciating it was amazing. Like otherwise you're just doing things on your own and nobody really sees it. So this was great to having like put it out there, received an award and appreciated, understood by everyone. So yeah, that was.
But in this instance, it was building from scratch, right? When you take a particular brief in which there is already something, it may not be a commissioned work as well. And then you start stripping it down to its bare minimum. So any insights there, like what are the biggest obstacles, if I use that word?
I mean, in fashion, I think it's different. Like I do illustration, but then I also do like stuff created from scratch where I'm not looking at a reference. So it's like different sort of ways of doing it. So like this would have been taking the shapes and forming an element. And in terms of fashion, what I do is kind of I have a reference and then I have to illustrate it in its sort of most minimal form, or yeah, like with a reference essentially, which is how I think most illustrators work, with some sort of a reference. So in terms of
so I'll tell you the thought behind asking this question as well. When you see a sculptor, the person is removing constantly to achieve a particular form which he or she must have visualized. Yahan pe it may not be that, because you may not have envisioned what is going to be. So you keep removing. But then when do you stop? Like And how do you identify? Because it's in design context, especially in my domain where I have a particular task in designing a UI. So the form and the function and all those cliche words are very clearly set, right? But in terms of illustration, how do you arrive at that?
So I also sometimes essentially like if I'm say like I did something for like I just did a Ganpati for Ganesh Chaturthi, and essentially you look at the Ganpati and I have to kind of in my head figure, okay, this is a triangle and 2 circles and it looks like a Ganesh. So it's like kind of, so I also do it from scratch, and then you add stuff, you remove stuff, you work with the composition, stuff like that. So essentially, I don't know, I feel like I try to, like everything I see from my eyes is eventually a shape. So like a circle for me means so many things. So like you add a circle and just add one shape around it, it could mean different things. So like the Ganpati, for instance, would be a inverted triangle with 2 semicircles. So that is, I think that is like the way I see things also.
And I mean, this is slightly personal, but does then like a blank canvas intimidate you? I mean,
not really.
Because I like did one interview with Ranganatha Krishnamani, and he was saying like a white canvas looks like very intimidating. So I first painted black or like blue, and then start building on top of it, right? So he has a peculiar style to it. So any process?
I mean, I'll sketch a little bit first. Like obviously if I just go on to, for me the canvas is my artboard on Illustrator. So if I just go on and I'm like, okay, I don't know what to do. So definitely sketch, get some ideas and then get on it. Or sometimes I'm like, I've actually seen the entire thing in my head and then I just go onto the computer and like it's done in literally 5 minutes. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think like minimalism restricts like color palette or choice of images, or I'm just trying to understand your thought process, like how does any particular work translates into an artwork?
So I have a certain, if you see like my work, I've kind of moved towards this very like understated like pastels and muted colors. But I think it's also about the choice of colors. Like if you use like, I don't use like bright reds or blues, or it'll be like little more subtle. So the same thing, but like if it's on brief commissioned, I would obviously do it like for Google or things like that. But I don't think it's restrictive. I think it's just kind of, it's also like you have to also sort of use less colors essentially. Like if you see most minimalist work, it'll be not so many colors. So yeah,
I mean that's what, like, do you prefer like a sans serif versus serif, because serif is more ornamental then? I mean, does that get
definitely.
to that,
I have like for me a geometric sans is like my favorite font to use. Like usually like avant-garde or my Nutra is like one of my favorite fonts now, so that I kind of use that in most sort of artworks and things wherever there's text. So it's like, so geometric fonts are, because again, coming like your O is a circle and then everything flows from that, and it's sort of monolinear and goes with, I guess, my kind of work. So yeah, I usually like for my personal work I use geometric fonts.
So it means that you consciously take those calls of using less fonts or less variations of fonts and then pastel colors.
Yeah.
It is. Can there be a case where it is minimalism? It's a work of minimalistic art or whatever, but there are some crazy colors used and any example?
I mean, like I did this mural for Google recently. So if you see it, there's a lot of colors, but it's still, it looks like it's my style, and I've kind of toned down those, the reds and the blues also to kind of look muted, and the graphics are also fairly, like again, forming, like using the most basic shapes, but making it look like what it's meant to. That's the most recent example.
Yeah, I've got few more questions, but I think for this particular session, I would like to just conclude with one last question. Is that what would be your like one takeaway who wish to explore into the minimal side of work? I mean, any insights, any
I
suggestions?
mean, I think like whenever like people like young illustrators or students or whatever, they ask me, I feel like it just, you should stick by like your sort of like this came to me naturally as a person. I am like that, so it came naturally and it kind of goes on to every aspect of my life. It's not just work. Like everything of mine is very similar. So like I would just tell them to sort of follow your heart and explore your whatever comes to you naturally, and not sort of follow a art period or a style or stuff like that.
No, but unless you explore those, how will you come to know
So
that this is my
exactly,
style?
so you have to keep, and it takes a while to kind of arrive at a style. So even for me, like it took a year to kind of experiment, see what it's like, what do I like, what comes to me easily, and even after that I'm still evolving. It's not like I'm done. Like you grow with every piece of work that you do. So yeah, I just feel like the uniqueness comes from your individuality. So whatever you are should be on the paper. Like I mean, that's like, I won't say minimalist, maximalist, whatever. Like, I love all kinds of work. There's people doing a lot of color. Like, I love, like I was saying, like a lot of Japanese brands like Kenzo, Comme des Garçons, and so I'm quite obsessed with a lot of Japanese stuff. They are all crazy brands, but yeah, I still kind of it like fits in my aesthetic.
And do you think like we as Indians will be sometime completely minimalism?
I mean, no, India as a country, I mean, that's what we are, so it doesn't have to be. But like, what I try to do is in terms of design, like I said, if you see Iko Tanaka's work, it's extremely Japanese but extremely minimal. So like, I would not want to lose the Indian aspect, but like try to do basically like exactly, in fact, what he did with his work is what I aim to do with everything that I do.
Correct. No, I'm just asking this because the way Apple entered India now, suddenly Vivo, Oppo, and other like 1,000 other brands have started. The showrooms have started looking the same. The artworks have started looking the same. The type of fonts they try to use are very close to each other. There's no unique identity forming the way we used to have in different cases. And on the other spectrum, you also have languages and like 100 other scripts which are running. So how is that? How do you visualize that panning out in case of minimalism? I mean, to give you an example, I don't know. I think I was watching one video by Devdatta Patnaik, and he said that yes, Helvetica or say Pro Sans or some font is written on the highway, and it's clear that take right to whatever reach airport. Now that's a sign in say US because there's one language. So the board itself looks minimal, the typography, everything is consistent. But if you put that on a say like a Madras Express, Chennai Express highway, you have to write in 3 different fonts. So the challenge is there, right? Because then it automatically becomes noisy.
Yeah. But I mean, like if you see station signages, it's still like if you're in Bombay, it'll either be English or Hindi or Marathi. Like they don't have 3 languages. Especially in Bombay, you'll either see a English signage or a Hindi signage or both.
Or they have done it differently, right? So on the top you have Hindi, and then so they have added 2 more layers to make it aesthetically look good also.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you one more thing, like, is being minimal an elite thing? I mean, you've stayed sometime in Delhi also, in Bombay also. So is there, I mean, I don't know whether India being a developing country, there are different things and different aspects, but is minimalism, either it's an elite extreme thing or then like
I don't think it's an elite thing. I just feel like it's an aesthetic, and like for instance, like a Muji, to answer your question whether will India ever be minimalist, I don't think that's possible. But like Muji will attract 5% of the sort of evolved crowd, younger crowd in Delhi. But like if you see the houses, the kind of houses the rich people have, they will never go to Muji to buy anything, like from your whatever bed sheet to a cup or a glass or whatever. But I guess, I don't know, like I feel like also just being evolved in the sense like travel, all of that, which I don't think India will ever be, but it's not a bad thing. Like that is who we are, and so yeah, I mean it's just like a aesthetic. I don't think it's something that needs to be in our.
But we are slightly exposed, I think, because I believe the Chandigarh project, which Le Corbusier designed, right? So I think in around 1960s or 70s, if you see work of Hasmukh Patel as well, they have these phantom chairs and like straight lines. So these guys were, I think, inspired by the Baha'is movement, and then they brought into India. So there has been some sort of a penetration of minimalism, right? So you have any insights on that? I mean,
so like B.V. Doshi, his work is amazing, which is also, he used to work with Le Corbusier, and then that influence, or like with an Indian mindset, and all of his work is super minimal and looks so contemporary even today, which is, but it's like a separate sort of style that's there. I don't think it'll ever be like what minimalism is to like this, like Swiss design. I mean, that is them. Like, I don't think we'll ever be that, but it's there in whatever way. And I feel like commercially, what I try to do is for brands that want to be in that space where they're Indian yet modern. So that's what I try to do with my work, which is India modern or India contemporary. So minimalism is kind of like the Nicobar logo. So like say Nicobar is part of Good Earth, but what Good Earth is and what Nicobar is. So I would say like that's what I try to do even with Nicobar, where I sort of made it modern, Indian, contemporary. And Good Earth was like a very ornate, very Indian sort of brand. So like that's what I try to do in every sort of aspect in terms of illustration or branding or.
So is it safe, at least in the online product world, I can confidently say, so I'll ask, in the illustration world, is it safe to say that minimal work will have like a longer shelf life? It has been proven in architecture, at least. In UI interface, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, it is being proven as we are going along. In illustration,
I mean, minimalism is a style, but then you also have to have your own sort of
spin to it.
It's not like there are a lot of minimalist designers, but everyone has their own style or like things that they illustrate or colors. Like so, like for me, I think my color palette is quite strong. And like now people come up to me and they're like, "Oh, I see your work and I know it's yours." So I think that's a great feeling, which is not necessary that another person who's also doing minimalist work will look the same. So it's just about the technique and the kind of usage, but then you have to have your own vibe to it, essentially.
And if you have to summarize or conclude with, so I just actually 2 days ago I interviewed Prashant Godbole, and he's like an awesome photographer. So he says photos can be taken by anybody, but what matters is the point of view.
Yeah.
So if you can summarize your point of view with respect to minimalism.
Point of view in the sense like in terms of
like yeah, I mean all that you spoke just now, but just to articulate in a sense that how do you develop that, or is it an innate thing? Is it
I think like I said, it's innate, and like if anyone asks me, I think it should come to you naturally. If you're not a minimalist by nature or by design or aesthetic, it's like then you're just forcing it. Like some people, like their work is what they are. Like you see them the way they dress and you see their work, it's like illustrators and things. So it's like, it's basically who you are. That's how you become unique. So I won't really tell anyone to go down this route unless they should just explore who they are on paper, essentially. It just comes from your like personality, essentially.
Yeah. Cool. I think on that note, we'll conclude and keep it minimal as well. And if people have to follow your work and reach out for any collaborations, what's the best way?
Instagram, Shweta Malhotra.
Okay, cool. ठीक है. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
giving your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Savan, Stitcher, or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.